There has never been such a tense atmosphere in Atlanta, and now rumors from behind the scenes are circulating like wildfire. There are rumors that Kirk Frost, who frequently stirs things up, may have gone too far and left the entire group in disarray. Kirk's remarks are said to have pierced so deeply through what appeared to be a routine conversation that Mendeecees himself reached the limit of his tolerance and exploded in a way his fans never imagined. They would observe, stunned and split. The cast could only watch as the heated discussion descended into complete mayhem. The fact that the occurrence didn't occur in secret or in silence just serves to heighten the shock. The drama reached a whole new level when it happened directly in front of everyone. According to sources in ways that might never be healed, the cast's trust was destroyed, alliances were dissolved, and emotions ran high. The nagging question now remains for supporters. What specifically did Kirk say that set Mendeecees on fire? And why did it have the ability to split Atlanta in such a way? This is just the beginning of the narrative, so stay tuned. Violent altercations are nothing new in Atlanta. However, what transpired during this specific tape has rocked the cast's foundation. In an effort to quell brewing emotions before they erupted out of control, the meeting was intended to be a moderated conversation. Rather, it became the setting for one of the most memorable meltdowns in the history of the franchise. Insiders disclosed that Kirk Frost, who is renowned for his scathing remarks and unrepentant manner, said things so scathing that they tore away Mendeecees' composed exterior and drove him to a breaking point that nobody anticipated seeing on TV. Cast members were seated in a semicircle on the set when it all started out innocently enough. The typical arguments kicked off the conversation: relationship baggage, loyalty concerns, and financial difficulties. However, there was a volatile energy beneath the surface, as if everyone knew a larger eruption was imminent. With his arms folded and a smirk that has gotten him into trouble in the past, Kirk leaned back in his chair. Seated immediately to his left, Rashida already had an uncomfortable expression, as though she could tell her husband was going too far. Mendeecees, on the other hand, was first calm, his posture steady, his voice managed. He concentrated on answering the persistent rumors regarding his relationship with Yandy. Their marriage had been the subject of rumors, whispers that Kirk had been stoking in his own private discussions. Kirk was the one who brought those rumors to light when the cameras started to roll, and the room was astounded by the bluntness with which he delivered it. Kirk allegedly said, "You always trying to play the good husband," as he leaned forward. Let's be honest though. Everyone is aware that Yandy bears a greater portion of the burden than you did. The remarks pierced Mendeecees' pride and weighed heavily in the air. A change in the room could be heard. There were gasps, apprehensive giggles, and even some cast members talking to themselves. Mendeecees' eyes narrowed and his jaw tensed. His eyes narrowed as he took in Kirk's words. He shot back, his voice quiet but full of controlled rage. "Man, don't disrespect me like that." Yandy put a touch on his arm right away, silently pleading with him to remain composed, saying, "You don't know what I do for my family. Don't talk about things you can't understand." Her face told the Rashida had fought countless battles to shield her marriage from public scrutiny. But this felt different, an attack taking place right in front of her from someone who was supposed to be part of their extended circle. She was filled with hurt, embarrassment, and a glimmer of fear that the situation could turn into something uncontrollable. Cutting through the tension, she pleaded with her husband, "Kirk, stop. This isn't the time or the place." Kurt was unmoved, and instead of calming the situation, he doubled down. "If you were really the man you claim to be," Kurt added in an icy tone, "your wife wouldn't always be cleaning up your messes. She wouldn't have to defend you every time your name gets dragged." Everyone in the room gasped, including those who weren't directly involved. Carly's eyes widened, Sierra covered her mouth, and Scrappy slumped back in his chair and muttered, "Oh, this is about to go left." The serene exterior broke at that very instant, and Mendeecees jolted to his feet, his chair squeaking on the ground. His fists were tight, his breathing deep, and he pointed squarely at Kirk. His voice rose to a level no one had ever heard him reach. "Say that again," he yelled, the tension in the room shifting from verbal strain to the threat of physical violence. The production team said, "Say it again and see what happens," went on high alert right away. In anticipation of what would quickly escalate into a full-scale altercation, security guards started to approach. The rest of the cast watched in startled silence, while others shifted anxiously, some attempting to play peacemaker. Yandy stood up, putting herself between Kirk and her husband, her face pallid. "There's no use in doing this," she pleaded urgently, pressing her hands to Mendeecees' chest in an attempt to stop him from exploding. But anyone watching could see that he was just seconds away. Kirk, for his part, stayed seated, but his smirk only added fuel to the fire. His lack of regret and his refusal to back down were like salt in an open wound. Pulled at his arm, begging, "Kirk, let it go. You're aggravating the situation." Mendeecees pushed forward, but Kirk's pride prevented him from stopping him. "I'm just speaking the truth," he yelled, his voice echoing over the room. "If the truth hurts, that's not my problem." His words were like petrol to a match. The stage went into turmoil, with cast members yelling, crew scrambling to restore order, and cameras capturing every angle of the mayhem. Security managed to detain them just in time. Mendeecees, who had established a reputation for being cool under pressure, was now at the center of one of the most explosive outbursts in history. And fans who later learned of the stolen accounts couldn't believe it. Recent memory. As word spread, social media was ablaze with criticism. One fan tweeted, "I've never seen Mendeecees snap like that," while another said, "Kirk's mouth finally got him in trouble. Kirk must have struck a profound chord." Hashtags started to circulate, with viewers split between those who thought Kirk was just Mendeecees, that the insult wasn't just about him, but about his role as a husband, a father, and a protector. But what made the situation even more intense was how personal it all felt. This wasn't just about typical reality TV drama. It went right to the heart of manhood, respect, and marriage. For Rashida, it was another painful reminder that her husband's words frequently created battles she never asked for. And for Yandy, it was a public humiliation that reopened old wounds she had worked so hard to heal. Sierra later confided to close friends that the energy in the room was terrifying, that it no longer felt like TV. What was supposed to be a conversation descended into a near brawl, and the cast as a whole was left shaken. As the dust settled, producers intervened to separate the men. But the damage was already done. Relationships were broken, trust was destroyed, and what should have been a conversation turned into a near brawl that would surely have long-lasting effects, not just for Mendeecees and Kirk, but for the group dynamic as a whole. And more importantly, how would Mendeecees bounce back from being pushed so far out of character in front of his wife, his peers, and the world watching from behind the scenes? Why did Kirk go that far? Was it just provocation for the cameras? Or did he really believe what he was saying? Even after security had managed to separate the two men, the weight of what had just transpired hung heavy in the air. And the cameras kept rolling, catching every nervous look, every whispered conversation, and every tearful expression that followed the near explosion. The chaos on set was followed by a heavy silence that seemed to last long after the shouting stopped. Mendeecees always took pride in being level-headed and avoiding reckless drama, but now, in front of everyone, Kirk had not controlled his emotions. The cast sat scattered across the room, some of them still, but no matter how calm her tone was, her words barely seemed to reach him. Kirk, however, seemed almost unfazed. He sat with his arms crossed, his jaw set, but his eyes still carried that same stubborn defiance. Even with Rashida silently reprimanding him under her breath, warning that he had disrespected him and undermined his role as a husband. "I'm not taking back what I said," Kirk muttered, loud enough for a few castmates nearby to hear, "and if he can't handle it, that's on him." Kirk remained firm in his stance, believing that he was speaking his truth and that truth didn't need to be sugarcoated, even if it meant starting a war. Sometimes men need to hear the truth. Rashida covered her face with her hands and shook her head in shock, realizing that this time, unlike the many seasons in which Kirk's actions caused tension, this wasn't a small quarrel that could be dismissed later. Rather, it was the kind of harm that might permanently sever connections. "Bro, you went too far," Scrappy remarked forcefully, his voice echoing over the anxious room. "This ain't about keeping it real anymore." In front of his wife, you treated the man disrespectfully. Do you understand what that means? Yes, Kirk, you love pushing buttons, Carly added in a scathing tone. Kirk's pride prevented him from admitting any guilt, and he slumped back in his chair and let out a heavy breath. "I didn't say anything that wasn't already true. Everyone knows it. But this ain't a joke." Some things you just don't say, especially not on camera. Mendeecees, who had just started to examine his breathing, swung his head swiftly towards Kirk as those words sent another tremor of anxiety through the gathering. His voice trembled with rage and his look was piercing. "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth," he muttered in a low, threatening tone. "You have no say in what we do." Yandy's eyes filled with tears as he said, "You don't get to disrespect the mother of my kids." Not out of weakness, but rather because she was hurt to see the guy she loved being forced into a public conflict he had not requested. She was aware of Mendeecees' imperfections. There was no marriage, but she also was aware of how hard he had worked to establish himself following his absence, how dedicated he had been to restoring their base. Kirk's reckless dismissal of all of it was like reliving old wounds she had battled to heal. Uncomfortably, the remainder of the cast moved. Nobody knew what to do. Unsure whether to stop recording or let the scene unfold, the producers hurriedly whispered to each other. Drama was the lifeblood of reality TV. This was more than simply drama, though. In a way that felt dangerously unstable, real life was leaking into the show. Crew members drew Rashida away outside the cameras and asked her to try to bring Kirk in. Before everything started to go south again, Rashida, who was obviously worn out, moaned as she went to her husband. Her voice trembled with dread and despair as she asked, "Do you realize what you're doing? You know what happens when you tear down another man in front of his wife and everyone else? Because if you can talk about him like that, how do you think people see me? It makes me look at you differently." Kirk glanced at her, his defenses lowering for a minute, but his stubbornness refusing to let go. "I wasn't trying to disrespect you, babe," he replied. "I simply expressed what I thought was necessary. Being honest and being cruel are two different things." Rashida fired back. "And you made a harsh choice tonight." Mendeecees, meanwhile, attempted to escape the hot atmosphere backstage. Yandy never took her hand off his arm as she led him to a peaceful nook. She told him about their kids and how they had to set an example for them. About how a man could sometimes make the strongest message by simply leaving. Mendeecees' eyes stayed gloomy as he listened. The injury Kirk had caused was still very much present. The words, "You don't know what I've been through," Mendeecees murmured softly, his voice full of passion. "He has no idea what I gave up or what it's like." Yandy clutched his hand as her own tears streamed down her cheeks. To come home and fight every day just to prove yourself again, and for him to sit there and talk like I'm nothing, like I don't carry my family. That cuts deep, Yandy, real deep. Whispering, "You don't have to prove yourself to him," she said. "You have already shown yourself to the children, to me, and to us. That's what counts. Not Kirk, nor what anyone else thinks, nor what he says." Her words pulled him back from the brink like a lifeline. He nodded slowly while inhaling deeply, seemingly to let out some of the pent-up anger. However, the agony persisted, brewing beneath the surface, awaiting a new spark to light it. The men weren't the only source of friction. The women also experienced division. Carly and Sierra publicly sided with Yandy and Mendeecees and chastised Kirk for his insensitivity. Others, however, murmured softly, wondering if Kirk's statements were true and if Mendeecees had truly fulfilled the role he represented. The ensemble was in danger of being even more divided as a result of those uncertainties, which provided another level of drama. Nothing had been decided by the time the night's filming was over. Rashida and Kirk went their separate ways. He followed, grumbling to himself, as she stormed out in frustration. Mendeecees, as well as silence, spoke more than words as Yandy quietly left, hand in hand. Knowing that what they had just seen would not be readily rectified in the upcoming show, the other members of the cast exchanged uncomfortable looks. Even the city of Atlanta experienced division. Online, fans swiftly took sides, and contentious discussions dominated social media timelines. Trending hashtags included Totuni Team Yandy ending Team Kirk, both sides fervently defending their preferred blogs and gossip pages, posted snippets, replies, and analyses of every word that was uttered at the same time. What started out as a private feud had now spread to the public sphere, where all viewpoints were valued and all stories were up to discussion. The cast was also aware that the fallout was just getting started when the sun rose the following morning. The scars from that night would not go away easy, and the battle lines had been established. There was a tense and apprehensive mood surrounding the cast the morning following the violent confrontation. Outside the filming area, production vehicles were queued up, and crew workers moved swiftly while chatting in whispers about how the previous night had become something that no one could have planned. Even the creators, who seemed anxious about the line that had been crossed, and who thrived on disruption for excellent television. Unquestionably, the altercation from yesterday night had evolved into more than a mere spectacle. It had become a plot point with actual repercussions. The atmosphere was somber when the actors started to arrive. While some people avoided making eye contact, others couldn't stop spreading rumors. Constant notifications buzzed through cell phones, and group chats were inundated with screenshots of popular posts. Atlanta blogs had already dissected Kirk's remarks and posted snippets all over the place. Yandy's emotional response to Mendeecees' rage. Supporters were split, and the internet debate became louder by the hour. Yandy entered first. Her face was composed, but wary. Although she exuded grace, it was evident that the weight of everything was still present behind her eyes. Mendeecees trailed closely following, silent and reticent. He seemed resolved to speak as little as possible, as seen by the clamped mouth. The crew immediately observed his manner, as opposed to the fire they had witnessed the previous evening. This man would not allow anyone to feel satisfied by another outburst. He still had a storm inside of him, though. Kirk and Rashida came in from the other side of the room. They had a tense walk together. Her face was filled with frustration as she folded her arms. The room went cold. Kirk himself shifted uneasily for the first time. There was no shouting. There was no mayhem. It was tame rage, and for some reason, it seemed more riskier. Rashida intervened immediately. Her tone was urgent. Could we simply put an end to this before it travels wherever it doesn't have to? Kirk, you must pay attention, because if you continue to push, you will lose more than just your fans. Everyone here will no longer respect you if you leave. Kirk, however, found it difficult to swallow his pride. He tried to defend himself by shifting in his seat, but Rashida's remarks were more devastating than he had anticipated. He didn't have any quick return. The rest of the cast exchanged anxious glances. Tokyo raised a quiet voice. It's no longer simply the two of you. The rest of us were caught in the center of this whole situation. Online users are picking sides and entangling us all in them. We are unable to post at all without receiving feedback regarding last night. It was accurate.